Well, good morning, everybody. We are here at our Board Bootcamp Operation Fit to Serve. So this is our second session, and we are focusing on family on the board. So we've got Dan Finken here with us, as well as Josh Gentine from Bench Consulting, as well as a third generation board member from Sargento. Uh, we, yeah, well, we'll start off with Josh. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Glad I could join. Uh, as mentioned, I third generation owner board member at Sargento Foods. Sargento was started by my grandfather back in '53. Been family owned and operated ever since. And my role, there are four of us independent, or excuse me, family directors on the board, as well as having five independent directors. We are a fiduciary board. I've been on the board for 8 years now. Um, and in addition to my board work with the family, I also founded a consulting practice that works with enterprising families who have operating companies or family offices, navigate a lot of the stuff that we have navigated over the last 70 plus years of our experience as family members. So we work with clients across the country, helping them navigate alignment, succession, conflict within their family enterprise.
You, you've taken
And I
a,
live and I live in Charlottesville, Virginia. I've got a son and a daughter, and so everyone thinks I'm from Wisconsin or I live in Wisconsin. I go up to Wisconsin a lot, but I live in Charlottesville. So
okay, okay, nice. So, and you've had interesting path to where you are today, right? With your,
it was not clean. It was not straight.
sure.
Yeah, I can. I'll walk through that. So, growing up, I got an awful lot of pressure to be a part of the family business from my dad in particular. I've got in our generation, third generation, we have 17 of us, and not including spouses. And so, my dad sort of said, "You're the one that I want to represent our family." And so I got a lot of pressure to go into the family business. I followed that direction and that path for many years. Studied finance at Notre Dame, did all of the things that our family participation plan had outlined, and at the same time was thinking about being a Catholic priest. And those two don't go together. So I was sitting in a board interview to potentially take a role back in the business and realized I was not going to be a good leader of the organization if I didn't answer that question first. And so I went down to Carolina, Chapel Hill, and got my MBA first. And then I went back to Notre Dame to be a Catholic priest. And after spending a year discerning that call, realized that wasn't where I was being called. And so I called Deloitte Consulting instead, and they had offered me a job in business school, and they said, "Hey, if you leave the seminary, give us a ring." So I joined Deloitte Consulting. I spent 4.5 years doing global M&A. I was the governance and decision rights guy on transactions. And while I loved the work, I missed humans. It was frameworks. It was traveling around literally every day. And I just missed human connection. And so I started coaching internally at Deloitte. And then I had a client on the outside who had a large family business. And he asked if I could support their family and build the governance that we had at Sargento for their family business. And in doing that work, um, realized that this is where I fit and how all of my sort of experiences come together in one place. And I joke that I'm 70% pastor and 30% strategist in the work that we do. And if you're on this call, you can probably appreciate why why that is. So it's a lot of psychology, but it's the strategy, it's the governance, it's the estate planning, how that all comes together. And these are the things that we've had a chance to work on for many years in our family, and now I get to support others in that. So not a clean path, Kristen, but landed in a good spot.
And I'm sure that background all helped shape who you are and has helped
Yeah.
in ways you wouldn't expect.
100%. Yep.
Awesome. So
All right.
we can jump right in.
Josh, I'm probably gonna have a few questions for you as we go because
Please.
I didn't know a ton about your background, but were you ever on the payroll at Sargento Foods?
I was on the payroll all through high school and college, cutting cheese in the back rooms, working in the factory. Um,
So
but
what plant were you in?
never in a corporate setting.
Yep.
Yeah. I was in did you ask what plant?
Yeah.
I was in the Plymouth plant.
Okay, so that did you did grow up in Wisconsin then?
Yeah, I grew up 1 mile from the headquarters.
Okay, okay. Yeah, so in that Sheboygan area or whatever. And then
Yep. Yep.
uh I mean this is a question isn't related, but you mentioned how it was just you that was at least that's how you felt was kind of targeted by your pops to, stay with it or whatever. Did you had three other siblings? Do you have thoughts on
Yeah.
why that was?
It's
And
a good
now
question.
have you talked to him since about those kinds of things in the rearview mirror?
It's a great question. So, two siblings. I have an older sister, Amanda, and a twin brother, John.
Wow.
And if I reflect on the experience, I think, Dan, one of the things that I gravitated towards the business and towards finance. Here's some psychology for you and family systems. I gravitated towards that because I think in hindsight, it was my way of getting my dad's attention, right?
Okay.
I'm competing directly with a twin brother over here. My dad ran our consumer products business for 25, 30 years. And
Oh, okay.
so for me, it was a chance to be close to my dad. It was his passion was the business, and I wanted to share that passion with him. And so I followed that path. My brother studied history, and he was also at Notre Dame. He was my roommate, my teammate. We did everything together for 22 years. It was fantastic. But he studied history, didn't have an interest. My sister was an English major. She didn't have an interest, and so they kind of took themselves out of the running, and I was like the one. And then my cousin Louis as well. He followed the path that we had outlined in terms of our family participation plan, and is now our CEO. So he's the only family member in the business at this point.
Okay. Okay. I appreciate you sharing the psychology there on that a
Yeah.
little bit. And
And Dan, let me answer one of your other questions you asked if I've talked to my father about it. We've talked around it a little bit, and it's still, I think, a sensitive issue for my dad. And I'll give you a little bit more like dynamic there. He doesn't travel. He has really bad anxiety. And one of the reasons he stepped down as the head of consumer products was he couldn't fly anymore. And so my dad hasn't been on an airplane in 20 years. And so the idea that of having his kids back in Plymouth, he wanted us to be around because he wasn't traveling. And so there were a lot of different factors going on. And I think he's still, I'm not going to say disappointed in us, but disappointed that his kids didn't come back because it was something that he invested a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and financial resources into getting Sargento to where it is today. And so,
I,
I think he loves the fact. I mean, he was the one that nominated me to join the board when he decided to step down. So I get to keep that connective tissue with him through that experience.
I appreciate the openness on there. And I know that this is a top that we're here to talk about boards and this isn't really board related. So, but family is family
Sure.
and really appreciate kind of the open sharing there on
Yeah.
on some of that I think is always true and underlying, but not always admitted or spoken type of thing. And anyway, and then you said you had a twin brother, so then my thought is quickly, well, where is he all in all this? Did he get the shaft, or did he,
No,
what happened to him?
no, none of us got the shaft. It was all because we had a lot of governance in place. We did a
Yep.
lot of forward planning and thoughtful work. everybody knew what you were signing up for. If you wanted to be a part of Sargento, here's what it looks like. And, I talk a lot about expectations in our work with clients and in family enterprises. It's about level setting an expectation and getting clear about expectation. So for us, everything was very clear. Like, if you wanted to be a part of it, this is what it's going to look like. And here's the why behind what that's going to look like. And I think that was really important. For my brother, he didn't have an interest in business. He started teaching the
Okay.
day he graduated college, and he's still a teacher up in Vermont. Coaches, he and I were both walk-ons on the football team, and he now is the head football coach up in Hanover High School, and absolutely loves what he gets to do. And still a shareholder. We all come back for shareholder meetings. So it worked out.
So does that mean, I think I'm doing this right? Does that mean you're kind of a Rudy?
John, my twin brother was more of a Rudy than me. I was a kicker and a punter.
I was gonna
So
say you don't look like a linebacker, Josh. No
I'm
offense.
not a linebacker. But my brother, who's about the same build, he was a wide receiver, so he got pummeled. I like to think that I worked smarter, not harder.
Okay. The lonesome kicker. I like
That's
it.
right.
All right.
Yep.
All right. Sorry that we got off there. I
All
just
good.
think that's really interesting, and one thought that I have is, even just as young third gen, so however many years ago that was for you guys, you
Yeah.
already had a ton of stuff in place, it sounds like. And I feel like, I don't know how to say that. When you're a bigger company, you tend to get a lot more of the resources and consultancy type of information and best practices, et cetera, on this whole family piece of family
Yeah.
business. And when you're a smaller company going into Gen 3, a lot of that stuff is very foreign, and you don't know about employment policies and requirements for working and uh, paths to take within the biz. There's it's not like that, and I I feel like part of our mission is to try to help those families that maybe aren't otherwise hearing that message to know that there are things that they can do to try to prevent some Jerry Springer moments and things like that. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that as a consultant yourself.
Yeah, I mean, this is what we do every single day. And while a lot of our clients are larger family institutions, the reality is whether you're a $5-10 million family business or a $5 billion family business, a lot of the practices and let's call it best practices um, are universal.
Right.
And it is about level setting and expectations. If you're a small family business, it's an expectation of how are we going to do this? What is that going to look like? How are we going to make decisions together? Who gets to make those decisions? It's the exact same thing in a $5 billion family business. And so these practices are universal. And whether it's the work that you guys are doing, the resources that are out there, the consultants like myself, a lot of this is available if you go looking for it. And I think seeking it out and finding the resources, you don't have to have the giant family business to be able to implement these best practices because it really comes down to being able to effectively communicate as a family about what you want and how you're going to structure that to make sure that you can prevent, as you say, the Jerry Springer moments.
Yeah, I said that. Yeah. I wouldn't expect Pastor Josh to use nomenclature like that. So we'll keep going here. That's my segue too into this topic. I think I'm working it in as a segue anyway, is that I think so we're going to talk about resistance to boards first within the family, speaking as if families don't have one now, or that's the baseline we're going to start from. And I think one of the pushbacks is, well, we're not big enough to need that, or we're not complex enough. That's for big publicly traded companies or that kind of a thing. We've got 40 employees or whatever their size is, and I think that's one of the common objections as well. And so I appreciate you mentioning just how family is family, and regardless of how big your company is, you still have a lot of overlapping issues regardless of size. And so,
Yeah.
but then we got some other ones listed here, obviously, that are other big ones that I hear from founder Frank types all the time, of I don't want somebody else telling me what to do. I pursued this path to be my own boss, and a board of advisors sure sounds to me like a bunch of people telling me what to do. And on top of that, maybe I even have to pay them to do that. And that's just not who I am or what I want to do. And,
Yeah.
um, I don't want to sit in meetings. Sometimes is obviously part of that too. But I feel like a couple of the big ones are, the privacy issues, and I play this thing close to the vest, and I want to keep it that way. And I don't trust others, and I don't need others telling me what to do. Um, you know, Certainly all very common objections. And Josh, I wonder if you have a thought on how you kind of handle some of those when they get thrown at you from the
Yeah.
family.
Yeah, I think um we did not we were not the size we are today when we built our board of directors, right? Board of
Great point.
directors
Yeah.
is not for just for publicly traded companies, the Sargentos of the world. It can be for any company. In fact, I just joined a board for a very small company, under $5 million in revenue. This is a tiny little business. And they're pulling together a board of advisors. We're not paid, but we're there to help them out, and support them in their decision-making process, and offer perspective. And I really like the folks, and I'm willing to tell them sort of how I see the world, and the direction that I see them going. Um, and it is not a if you select the right board members, it is not about telling you what you should be doing. It should be people asking you great questions about how
Right.
you're thinking about what you're doing. Right. And there's a big difference between the two. And I think that's this idea that, oh, I don't need outsiders telling me what to do. No, it's outsiders offering a point of view or a perspective that you may not see. And especially in family businesses where a lot of the leadership is homegrown and comes from within. That ecosystem that the insulated environment of your family business is really important to have outside perspective, and to have people coming in from the outside to challenge convention and to ask the hard questions about the way the business is operating. And what's interesting is, if we go back to governance and decision rights, depending on how the board is structured, and odds are, if you're a smaller family business, and even under, let's call it $1 billion, odds are you probably have an advisory board and not a fiduciary board. And so the reality is they can't tell you what to do.
Right.
They don't have the decision rights on it. They don't have any legal authority to tell you what to do. They're just offering points of view. And so this idea of being taken over by the board, or I don't want to lose control, you don't. You don't. And the reality is, a board of directors is selected by the shareholders of the organization in a fiduciary setting, and even in an advisory setting. And so the reality is, if you don't like the perspective and you don't like the way a board member is operating in the boardroom, then change out your board members, find new board members. And it's about the selection process that I think is really, really important, in building a board. And we have had our board, God, I'm going to bastardize this, but let's call it 50 years. And we have had a lot of different board members in those 50 years. And we are a fiduciary board, but we have brought on people who understand our values, understand how we operate, how we think, and what we're trying to achieve as owners. And that's the guiding the sort of the true north for how they think about decisions. And yes, they have a fiduciary responsibility, and they're also trying to do what is in the best interest of the shareholders.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with everything you said there. I think, another point I would say too is I think that sometimes people jump to board meetings being these very conflictive or confrontational types of interactions, or something they've seen on TV or read about, or some sort of board coup or whatever. And the reality is it just never really happens for the most part. And I mean, sure, there can be some conflict once in a while and some discussion, but usually that's just healthy discussion. And for the most part, people are there. And if the people are there to help and not to create conflict or to,
Correct.
raise their ego above everybody else's. And if you don't have people like that on your board, then you got the wrong people, obviously. So.
Yeah. Yep.
Thanks for sharing that, Josh. I appreciate it. And, kind of mentioning how you guys weren't a $2 billion company when you started your board either,
No.
obviously, right? So appreciate that. Let's see what's next here. We'll talk a little bit about, reframing the conversation on, you know, it's not an oversight type of thing. You mentioned working at Deloitte, I think, and it's not the audit team coming in. uh, and it's certainly not the IRS audit team. It's supposed to be and is most of all the time an asset for your business as far as we're not here to be the checks and balances. We're here to offer advice, firsthand experiences of dealing with similar things, connectivity, connections to new people, a network that you don't have, open doors to things like that. I think helping reframe the conversation from this we're here to protect, the company or type of thing is and more to we're here to certainly watch out for the company, but just to lend our voices and our experiences and our advice, and you take that where you want to type of thing, especially in an advisory board situation, which I think is kind of what we're advocating for those to start with who have nothing in place right now. And I
Right.
don't know if you hear that from families, Josh, or if you have anything to share there.
Yeah, in a fiduciary setting, there's a bit more oversight, and it's required by law. In the advisory board setting, I think this from oversight to asset truly is an accurate statement, and um, I would say 50% of our clients, we are helping them build their advisory board, and we're doing it because it is an asset to the family in terms of bringing that outside perspective to challenge conventional thinking and um, to help let's call it level up or in many instances professionalize the way the group is operating and presenting and like coming together as a group. Um, and the when we talk about a board, and I think you're going to get to this, Dan, as well, but independent directors and having independent directors on that advisory board is just so important. That's where I think it's really an asset and not about oversight. Because the independent directors are bringing that objective perspective. They don't have the baggage of the family history to navigate, and they can provide that sort of clear lens on the way things are operating. And one of the things that we have leaned on our independent directors heavily on, and we've formalized a structure around this, but um, the independent directors are really an asset when it comes to navigating succession planning and difficult decisions as it relates to family employment and promotions, terminations, and so forth, because now you have an objective lens. And I would say in almost all of the situations where we're building a board, we've got family members who are working in the organization, and those independent directors are able to provide perspective as it relates to the family members and their performance and just be another check on that because ultimately you don't want the family to negatively impact the business in their involvement, and by having those independent directors just saying, listen, you know, I don't think this is working out, and being able to say that is really, really powerful, and that is an asset.
Yep. I completely agree, which is, great promo for our third session that we're going to have. July 21st is going to be all about the independent side of things and
Perfect.
having independent directors and
Good.
what does that look like? I think today we're trying to talk a little bit even still about how do we convince the family that this is a good idea, and then how do we start something when we have nothing currently.
Yeah.
Um, And then what is
Dan,
my role when I work in the business and I'm a shareholder too, type of thing. Go ahead, Josh.
yeah, the getting started and convincing somebody that they need it. I mean, somebody who's totally against it, you're never going to convince them that this is an asset. It's going to be let me put it this, it's going to be hard. That
Yeah.
said, we would not be where we are as an organization. I can just use us as a proof point. We wouldn't be where we are if it weren't for our board. Like we've done a lot of things right. We have worked very hard. We've positioned ourselves well in the market. I think the entire leadership team of Sargento, family and non-family, they've done a great job over our 73 years of building out a very strong brand. And our independent directors, our board has been instrumental in keeping us together, both as a family and an organization. And that oversight that we're talking about has been the asset that we needed to get to where we are.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I hear that time and again, and I am glad you reverse course on your never type of thing at the beginning there, because I don't want people to ever say never, but it certainly is sometimes like knocking over a Coke machine. You can't
Yeah.
just run right at it and push it. You got to rock that sucker back and forth for a while before, whoever is not on board finally caves type of thing, right? And so, anyway, so that kind of brings us to our next conversation, our next slide, starting the conversation in our family. So, oh, we got some more, I'm sorry, we got these objections. Actually, go back to that because I want to give a plug for a workbook that we've developed, and mostly all of the work has been Kristen, to be honest. Um, we have a tremendous workbook, which I think I had kind of an older copy of it here and whatever. Anyway, we're going to be referring to that as we go through the slides, some of the different worksheets in there, conversation starters, resources in there flow directly with this three-part series that we're doing. And so, as you know, we give you some ideas and maybe some things to say back to those who don't want to lose control, who are afraid of having a little, letting some of their secrets out to some other folks type of thing. So thanks for bringing that in, Kristen. And then if we talk now about starting the conversation in our family, so if we've got, we don't, we haven't, we have, let's see here, we have, are we ready? So, I think you're going to take that one, right, Kristen?
Yeah, I mean, so once you've decided, or it depends who in the company is considering the board. I mean, you have to think about the company's readiness as well as the family's readiness. So, when you're thinking about the company's readiness, you need to, I think that a board adds the most value once the business has moved past the scrappy founder handles everything stage. If revenue and operations are still unpredictable, then the board doesn't have much to govern yet. And they need some operational stability to actually evaluate trends and hold management accountable to something. And I think you need to be able to identify those governance needs in order to um, find or ask this what specific problems would a board solve, if that's succession planning or strategic planning. Because if you can't name the gap, then the board may not be ready to help the company. So, on the other hand, family readiness, that's a whole nother beast. And Dan touched on that with why families might resist boards. So if they're still super resistant to having a board, it's not going to work either. I'm sure you've seen that too. I know when you get called in, Josh, is the company ready or is the family ready or both? Like what do you work through with that?
I would say by and large, it's just family ready. And Yeah, I would say is the family ready? Are they ready to layer on, let's call it another responsibility? And do we have the time? Do we have the capabilities? There's always this hesitancy, this idea of a board and the formalness of all of it is can be an intimidating thing versus recognizing that, like, listen, we're going to set up a board. We're going to meet a couple times a year. This is like start low pressure. And it's an entry point. And you're not going to have the Sargento board or the public company board on day one. We didn't have our board, nor our governance, nor our board culture and operations 50 years ago. Um, if I look back now, I wasn't around, but if I talk to some of those original board members, I can almost guarantee you that it was probably like a high school operation. And they got together with my grandfather and they all smoked cigarettes and ate cheese and talked about what should we do with this company.
Great.
It isn't what it is now, but you don't start at 100, you start at one. And that's a thing. And I think that's the most important thing for families to recognize is just get started. And you're going to make mistakes. It's not going to be perfectly organized, and you're not going to have all the data and so forth, but you just start. You start, and that's what the board is there to help you do is build out those capabilities and help you think about what other data would be important for us to take a look at to help advise your company, things of that nature. So, and what's interesting is this company readiness and um, as I mentioned earlier, I joined a very small company board, and they wouldn't fit the company readiness test. But they're not looking for us to necessarily dissect numbers and competitive, intel and market data. We're there to support them, and they're really teeing things up like, hey, these are the three big things we're working on. Can you help us think these things through? And here's some opportunities. How would you guys approach this? That's the board. That's it. We're not going through financials. We're really there as advisors helping support something that we believe in. And I think with that mindset, that's the way to start.
And so, again, from the workbook, we just have a family readiness assessment, so you can kind of check through that and see where you're at for the family readiness. And then starting the conversation.
Yeah. So, I think about a couple families I've worked with and just how the board has evolved from nothing. And oftentimes it starts with what looks more like a family meeting and a conversation amongst, probably first and second gen. There's type of folks, parents and kids, and um, that kind of serves a purpose as being a place to launch something from is do we want to make this a regular thing? Um, a great time to do that might be right after tax time when financials are fresh in the minds of those in the business and can be shared with the next generation. Have an agenda. I like the idea of a neutral facilitator, but that might sound self-serving, so I don't want to push that too hard, but I think it is a great idea often to have somebody that can kind of help move you along an agenda, especially if you've had some conflict in the past and this is a reboot of things because of that. So I often think of a family meeting as a great starting point, especially for a smaller business where an advisory board is going to be your first step. This can kind of be, the starting area for that. And I see they're eating cheese in that picture, so that's a good sign. Josh, any thoughts that you might have to add to that?
I mean, I think the hardest step is just literally saying to your family, "Hey, I think we should start a board."
Right.
Just just putting it out there and saying, here's what I've learned, here's the why, here's what I'm thinking about. And um, oftentimes in families, when somebody suggests an idea, it is viewed as a demand versus an idea. And I think teeing it up and saying, let's get curious. Let's explore this together and see and evaluate the pros and the cons of what this would look like for our family, for our organization, um, and create dialogue around it, but I think just having the conversation. It's interesting. I was speaking at a family office conference in New York last week, and or 2 weeks ago, and somebody said, how do we start the conversation about governance? And I said, well, a great start is just to say, hey, we should have a conversation about governance. And it sounds silly, but at the same time, it's like you just have to kind of open that up and lean into it and recognize that it's an exploration and a starting point, not the end. And if everyone can get curious about what that means, what that looks like, and how it applies to a family and an organization, oftentimes there are enough sort of points of intersection that align with everybody that says, okay, you know what? Let's do this.
Oh yeah, and I think on a personal level, I've been the one, mentioning to my family, hey, we need to do something. We need to have this conversation. And the knowing pushback is always, is that really necessary? Can't we just do this informally, or we'll see each other at Thanksgiving and we'll talk about those documents or whatever it might be. And
Yeah.
you have to be sometimes a little bit thick-skinned enough to keep pushing the message that now let's try to make this a little bit more formal, type of thing. And so anyway, that's probably enough on that. I'll let Kristen go.
Yeah, so just building buy-in across the generations. We've talked about it, but the founder, the first generation, a lot of times it's a control issue, and a board can feel like the first real check on their authority that they've ever had. And you can frame the conversation like this isn't about taking decisions away from you, it's about building something that outlasts you. Or founders are often motivated by wanting the business to survive them. And I think for the second generation or even third, it's just a shift. They've seen it as dad's company, and now they can start seeing it as a shared asset that they have ownership stakes in, and the board just protects that ownership. So, and then even looking at non-employed family members, you can see it as an angle of just getting them in the loop. They can often become the strongest advocate just because they've been outside so long. They don't know how the business is operating. So a lot of times they want to know what's going on there, how the business is actually performing, because they have the least power in daily operations. So I mean, I think maybe you can agree that it's getting the founder to um be on board with the board is the most challenging.
I would say that is definitely the case. And what's interesting is founders, I think let me rephrase that. Good founders, strategic founders are constantly looking at how do I improve my business? What's the data that I need to make decisions? There's always this sort of instinct idea. And so if you mine for the values that the founder holds near and dear to their heart, and you kind of touched on it, Kristen, that's the leverage, and that's the lever to pull. And there's no question that, well, it's a selection bias for our consulting work, but founders are coming to us saying, "Hey, listen, we're trying to create a multi-generational legacy here." Well, the board is the connective tissue in many ways between generations, one to two, two to three, three to four, four to five, and it becomes that way of protecting that legacy in so many ways. And there's also this fear from founders of letting go.
Right.
Shocker to nobody. Um, and the idea is I'm afraid to let go, partly because I don't want to see the next generation fail. And I'm trying to protect the next generation. But in a board is a protective mechanism in that transition to the next generation because now that next generation has other points of view, they've got other advisors that they can lean on. It becomes that bridge and it creates kind of a protective halo around that next generation and some of the decisions that they're going to make. And so sometimes that can alleviate the fear of the G1 founder, knowing that, hey, it's not just my kid making decisions now like I used to make decisions. It's my kid and these other individuals who are here to support those decisions to make sure that we're making the right ones going forward.
So then, practical first steps when the family says maybe, and we've kind of talked about this too. So I think it's really about momentum management. So, the family is not opposed anymore, but maybe a little hesitant. Dan mentioned, we can not jump into we're forming a board, but let's just get everyone in a room and talk. And the tax return timing tip is a nice practical detail. I think seems simple enough. And even if you decide to pilot the board for a year with just a review at the end, a built-in review, can really address the fear of performance head on, and a lot of that maybe hesitation is really what if this is a mistake we're stuck with. So, I mean, just trying it out, making it a serious commitment for everyone, just to really give it a good go, give it an honest try, and kind of keep that fear out of a failure or it being a mistake.
One thing, Kristen, that I might add or that I want to add to this, getting started or this idea of maybe, I know you're going to talk about it in your next session. The idea of independence, if you're gonna start a board, um, I would encourage everybody start your board with a few independent directors on the board. So it isn't just another shareholder meeting or a family meeting. And like families conflate what these meetings are and what role they're in and what hat they're wearing at any given time. Make it a meeting. Make it a formal thing. It doesn't need to be a fiduciary board. It doesn't need to be overly formal, but like have a time, have a place, have an agenda, like start your board and have independent directors who are there to help you on part of that process. Have the family in the room, like have those family board members. But if you're going to do it, I would suggest doing it right by having some independent directors on. Those who are, you can start with friendlies, but like having that is really important. And I would say if you're going to pilot, we're talking about if you're interested in starting a board, it's likely because you're looking at succession planning and that this is
Mhm.
not a short-term thing. So if we think about piloting, I would suggest piloting for 3 to 5 years because you want to build the muscle. 1 year, you're going to have so many hiccups and issues and growing pains to work through that at the end of that first year, you're going to be like, well, I don't want to do that again.
Yeah,
Neither would anyone else.
uncomfortable.
So I would suggest giving it a longer runway. And, the odds are you're thinking in 10, 20, 50 year planning cycles in a multi-generational family business. So giving it 3 to 5 years is a drop in the bucket when you think about building a multi-generational family business. And so give it a little bit more runway and having that independence. And I love your last point, to find what success looks like. So the family has a way to evaluate. I think that is certainly a very important element of this, and having a candid conversation about what is success and how do we want to evaluate it, and then give yourself enough runway and not sit back and say in year one, well, it didn't look like success. Well, it's hard. I mean, odds are you're not meeting more than 4 times a year. as a group going through this something that you've never done before. That's really difficult. So give yourself enough of a runway to make it work.
Okay. And then I'm going to talk to a little bit real quick on why family representation matters. I mean, I agree, Josh, that having the independents on there is critical. And sometimes is the first thing that the founder might think of when, okay, you want me to start this board, who am I going to ask? And I think sometimes they don't think about their own family, their own next gen that's working there as seats to fill, which is why we're taking some time to have this second session so that family members don't get overlooked in this process. Because I think they bring a unique, I would say, like it says here, a dual role. They're potentially working there. Oftentimes they're working there, and they're hopefully either becoming owners or already are small shareholders in the business, depending on gifting schedules and how estate planning is being done by the family. But so they have, that day-to-day operational background that independents don't have. And then a couple other things that family members have, I think, is hopefully anyway, good family members, to Josh's point earlier about good founders or whatever, is that they have a need to, let's see, the values and vision and legacy of our company continue on, and they have that strongly in the front of their mind when they're thinking about how we're making decisions and how we're having conversation here at the board level about the business. So they've got that kind of, I would say, family protective mindset a little bit that independents might not have. Um, they know the employees. Oftentimes they've grown up with them, like you mentioned, cutting cheese, Josh, and maybe that wasn't the right thing to say there, but anyway, slicing the cheese and how, I'm sure you got to know employees that you never would have known otherwise, and et cetera. And the independents they frankly just don't have the time for that, right? And so, just a couple things that I think family members can bring uh, to the board that maybe are going to be overlooked a little bit or sometimes forgotten, especially by a founder who may be the one trying to be in charge of putting this together and who he or she is putting on the board. I don't know, Josh, if you have any thoughts on that or how that worked for your family's board evolution. And I'm guessing you can't go back 50 years of your own experience of knowing what the board looked like, but if you have stories of how it started or how it looked and how it evolved, it probably, I don't know if you want to add that here.
Yeah, the on the family side, I agree. Family representation on the board is really important, and it's for a lot of different reasons. And I think, if Chris and Dan, have you guys do you guys walk through the four-room model, that concept of the four-room model?
We're maybe still stuck on the three circle model here,
Okay.
Josh. So
That's okay. I want to just frame it for
go
a
ahead.
split second. If we think about the four-room model, the three-circle model is like the model, right, for
Right.
family businesses. But if we think about the four-room model framework, you've got an owner's room, boardroom, management room, and then a family room. And it's all about roles and responsibilities and understanding what hat am I wearing? What room am I in? What are the conversations that happen in that room? What's the governance in that room and how am I going to operate in that room? So if I look at my role as an owner and as a board member and a family member, I'm not in the management room. And so I don't have that point of view like my cousin Louis does. He is the only one in all four of our rooms in our entire family and the family system. But understanding which room you're in and sort of the hat that you're wearing is really important. And if we think about an owner in the boardroom, the owners are setting the rules. You get to define what success looks like, growth, liquidity, control. You get to define what do we want from this business? That's an ownership decision. Now, if you don't have any owners, family members in the boardroom, then you have to be really, really clear on how you transmit information from the owner's room to the boardroom. And so being able to transfer that is really important. I, as an owner and a family member, I can bring perspective into the boardroom that our independent directors can't bring. Louis is bringing this management perspective. There's four of us family members who are owners on the board, and then we have five independent directors. And we can transmit culture, values, and what the family wants into the boardroom for the independent directors to understand who are we and what do we actually want at the end of the day. That becomes really, really important because if you don't have that perspective, the independent directors, if you are going to have independent directors, may say, let's go in this direction, not recognizing that's not where the family wants to take things. Having cross-room representation is really valuable, and I think family members, especially if the governance is there, like family in the boardroom is essential. That's how decisions are going to get made. And in an advisory board, you don't have any decision rights anyhow. So you got to have family members who are owners who actually own those decisions at the end of the day.
Yep. Okay, so then we'll talk a little bit more about who should and shouldn't be on the board, maybe from a family perspective. I originally started out talking about families I've worked with or my own and just having everybody involved at the start in what maybe looks more like a family meeting than an advisory board meeting as a launching point. But, as you progress or think more uh, proactively on this subject and intentionally on who do we want and what do people need to bring to the table from a family perspective more than just a last name, is truly some things about have they worked in the business? Do they have some level of business acumen? Are they going to be able to read financials, understand them? Are they willing to commit the time? Are they thinking of this as an obligation versus an opportunity? Those kinds of things, which I think are pretty obvious, and just knowing that some board members might be ready, some family members might be ready tomorrow to serve on the board, and some family members maybe need a little time to get up to speed, and that can be on you as a family on how are we going to get them up to speed. And Josh, I'm sure with Sargento, you have some governing documents that talk about board development and other families do as well, where, okay, maybe you'll sit in as a spectator for a while or a listen only mode type of family member to see what a board meeting is like and what are they covering. And that's a way to bring maybe the next generation into that kind of a conversation. So, um, just making sure we don't have that. Um, this isn't supposed to be a meeting to recreate some Hollywood family business drama. This is a meeting to discuss opportunities, strengths, weaknesses of the business, where our future is headed, et cetera, in a cordial manner. We're not here to throw chairs at each other type of thing. And I don't, Josh, if you have any thoughts on that as you work with families on how you talk with them about who should and shouldn't be in those seats, maybe on the bus.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it is depends on the family and the number of branches and sort of ownership structures and how that unfolds. I think owner education and board development is really important. And so preparing well in advance of stepping onto a board, I think is critical. I think the idea, depending on how your board is operating, I talk about this advisory board is just perspective and points of view and it's not binding and there isn't a fiduciary nature. And at the same time, being prepared, understanding terminology and nomenclature of the business and acronyms and being able to converse intelligently and debate issues is really important. And so having a good grasp of the concepts and the industry and the business, you might be entitled per se because of the branches and how ownership is sorted out and who you want on the board. And at the same time, you're making decisions not on behalf of the family. This isn't about it's about all the stakeholders. And if I look at Sargento, for instance, we've got about 2,600 employees. The decisions we're making in the boardroom impact 2,600 families. And so the idea of just being the board member who gets a seat on the board, um, those are big decisions. That's a big responsibility. And you may not have 2,600 employees. You might have 26 employees. It's still 26 families who rely on you to make good decisions about their future and where you're going to take the company. And in addition to your suppliers and your customers. And so when you kind of think about it in terms of who's impacted by these decisions, the idea of being prepared becomes really, really important. And because it isn't about the entitlement mindset or avoiding it's you're making important decisions on behalf of a lot of people who are going to be impacted. Be prepared and be ready. And so we do a lot of owner education, custom curriculum for owners and rising gen and so on and so forth, and board development work. And we're looking at the technical skills. We're looking at the business specific industry information that somebody has to have, as well as how to just operate as a professional in a boardroom if you're not coming from that background. You might come from a creative background. You might come from something other than quote unquote business. But you still need to know how to operate and sit in that room and have healthy conflict and debate and friction and so on and so forth around these decisions. So having that skill set is just as important as having the technical expertise to unpack a P&L.
Great point. Yeah, I agree. Um, but the bottom line is there should be some level of intentionality about who's going to be on and who's not going to be on, and then some level of governance to back that up as far as qualifications, rather than making it look like somebody's playing favorites on who does and doesn't get to be on the board. So,
Yeah.
um,
And Dan and Kristen, just a heads up. I do have an extra 10 minutes. I'm gonna have to hop at 10 after. So just wanted to put that out there in
no
case
problem.
yep.
Thanks for your time here.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Let's keep going then.
And this is just another shot from the workbook. Um, what to look for in the family members.
Yeah.
So,
So then we're talking a little bit here about kind of how we're going to structure things. How many seats are we going to have for family, and that's going to evolve over time potentially, especially if we're starting with something that looks more advisory in nature, or even less sophisticated than advisory, if that's an option. It's just a family only board to start with or something like that. Where maybe those board meetings also serve as family meetings, but we I think at the end of the day, we want to have some level of odd setup of numbers and things like that. We want to make sure that we have representation from all branches of the tree that have ownership or that have active involvement in the company, um, generational um, differentiation. So let's not forget about G1, G2, and G3, or whatever those numbers are in your family. Making sure that we have representation from all of them, I think, is important. And maybe for those youngest ones, depending on their age, they're given a little different assignment at being at the board meetings. They're more of a listen only mode, as we talked about earlier, or just a way for them to get a little exposure to what's going on. And I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Josh.
Yeah, a couple thoughts. The idea of a board observer is a great training ground for board members. And so having formal observers, and I think we've got two different boards that we're working with or building out right now where they've got the ability to add three observers to their board is a fantastic way to understand how a board conversation goes and the
Mm-hmm.
kind of information, and then they can dig in deep on different things. The idea of how many we have had eight. So we were even. We were four family, four independent for the last 20 some years. And we actually just went to five independent and four family directors about a year ago. And it was really based on the fact that we had one board member stepping down and we had a slate of candidates, and two of them were so good, we're like, we just want those individuals. And we weren't worried about the independents taking over the board because, again, if we don't like our board members, we can ask them to leave because we're the shareholders. That's our job. So the idea of having an odd number, especially in sort of high stakes environments and public company boards, I think is important. We have in the history of sort of our board experience, we've never been sort of split 4-4. And the odds of you getting into that situation, unless it's a really contentious family dynamic and there's some major decisions. So I wouldn't use the odd number to drive the selection process. I would use the skills, qualifications, the board matrix, the competency matrix to drive who you want on the board, and then build it around that because I think it's more important to get the right people than the right number. So just a thought on that one.
I can agree. I appreciate what you're saying there. If we're tied to a number, we might overlook somebody that we really want, or grab somebody that maybe we don't quite need, type of thing too. I guess it
Yeah.
could work either way. Okay. So after that, we kind of look at let's see here.
So yeah, preparing family members to serve. So okay, you decided you're starting your board, but how do we make sure our family members are actually good at it? And that might be more the younger members or bringing in the next generation onto the board. Um, you know, educating your board members and onboarding is about just leveling the playing field. Just, outside directors, they come with experience. They know the rhythms, vocabulary, the expectations. Uh, but if you're stepping into your first board seat, they don't know what's expected of them. They walk in unprepared next to the seasoned directors. It can reinforce the dynamic you're trying to avoid, which is that family members are passive observers rather than contributors. So do you have a specific onboarding process? I mean, knowing or reviewing the past financials and understanding bylaws, what's been discussed in prior meetings. I think those are all good things, but do you have a onboarding process that you recommend for the
Yeah.
family board members?
Yeah, I think the onboarding for any board member is really, really important, and that can be the success or failure of that board member on the board. And is having that right sort of glide path into the system. And so I think um, certainly financials and historic. If you have a board and you're bringing new family members onto the board, then I think have allowing them to go back and look at the last 2-3 years of board decks and understand what is the material, what do I and what are the questions that I need to be asking. So literally sitting down with the leadership team to say, help me understand this acronym. What does this mean? Like being curious and being willing to look stupid just because you're a family member doesn't mean you should know everything if you're not operating the business. And I think this is one of the concerns that a lot of family members, this imposter syndrome, where I feel this feeling of like, well, what are these employees going to think if I don't know or I pretend I don't know this information, right? So being curious and being willing to look stupid and say, what does this mean? What is this number? Why is this? What's happening here? Like having that sit down with the CFO and COO or anyone in the leadership team is really important. I asked the question, I've been on the board 8 years. I had asked the question the other day from our chief revenue officer, like, what is that number? We keep using that. Like, what is that? Help me understand that. And it's like, it was common language for everyone internally in the business, but I'm not in the business. And so I had to ask that question. So asking questions, having a sit down. So get your pre-read or get all the materials, the board materials, confidential folders, signing your NDAs, all that kind of stuff. And then sitting down with the leadership team and saying, I'd like to spend 2 hours going through this material with you to make sure that I thoroughly understand it. That is going to build so much credibility with the leadership team as a family member versus pretending you know when you're in the room and you stay silent because you don't know.
Yeah,
So
especially after a couple of board meetings, then it's too late to ask because you've already
that's
pretended
exactly
you
it.
know what you're doing.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
exactly it. That's exactly it. So, there's onboarding checklists. You can have any number of things on there. I like to do if there are independent directors, one-on-one interviews with the new family members and the independent directors so that they can get to know each other, asking questions like, how do you get, like, what does a typical debate look like? Where have you found friction? What is your operating style? Getting into all of that human stuff, which creates a high-performing team, is essential for a board, hence any family member that's joining that board.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we just have a couple minutes of your time left, Josh, so maybe we'll just let you have any parting thoughts or advice for our families that you want to mention here. And then I want to get my thank you out there to you as well for your time and willingness to kind of share
Yeah.
and talk a little bit more about how you work with families on boards, how Sargento's board has evolved over the years has been great to hear. Our
Good.
families love to hear first person stories, of course, first perspective type
Helpful.
um, sharing. So thank you so much, Josh.
You're welcome. My advice, just get started. If you're on this call, it means there's a curiosity around it. And I think the idea of building this out, it's not going to be right. It's not going to be perfect. I'm working with a very large family business. And we had our first board meeting and wasn't great. It wasn't that clean. But it's the start. It's a journey. And the beauty of a family business is you're looking in decades, you're making decisions in decades, not in quarters or months. And so don't worry about it being perfect. Worry about it getting started and building the muscle over time because that will ultimately allow you to position the family and the business for success between generations going forward. So just get started.
Perfect. I couldn't agree more. It's just like anything else. Just get started. A journey of a
Just
thousand
go to the
miles.
gym and start.
Yeah. All right, cool. Thank you so much for your time,
You're
Josh. And
welcome.
Yeah, thank you,
uh,
Josh.
You're
we'll
welcome.
finish
Happy to
up here
help.
with just a couple more things that are from the workbook here. I want to make sure that we showcase those. So, Kristen, if you want to, yeah, Josh just mentioned having onboarding policies and bringing on new folks. We've got an onboarding checklist right here. So that was a great plug from him for some of the things that we've developed with this. Hope you have a chance to take a look at this workbook, especially between now and the next session that we'll have in July on this. But in
Yeah.
here we're talking about, just like Josh said, giving them the last couple 3 years worth of what's been happening with the company, financials, allowing them to ask questions, look at that. Um, Hearing a little bit about where we've been and where we are now and how we got between those two places, I think is going to be great for family members. Always assuming they don't know is part of that. Maybe conversations with a couple of key employees I think can sometimes be a forgotten step that can be really impactful especially for a newer, younger family member coming onto the board. They maybe don't know the CFO, they don't know the head of sales, of business development, those types of folks in the company. They've heard their name at the dinner table, but they've never met them or had the opportunity to interact with them in what I would call a professional manner. And those kinds of conversations can go a long way, both for kind of introducing the family member to the company, but also introducing those employees to the next generation of the family, showcasing that we're in this for the long haul. We want to stay family owned. We're investing in our next generation, building them up, getting them aware of what the company's all about. And, this is where we want to be. We're not selling out to private equity or whatever it might be type of thing. I think there's a lot of different unsaid messages that come from meetings like that. So I appreciate that we have that listed in here. Um, and I think that's it for that. I'll let Kristen go then with this.
Right. So, navigating the hard dynamics. So, family businesses carry that extra layer of that public companies don't, and that's that the people around the table have holidays and Thanksgiving dinner together too. So that's kind of the frame for everything that follows. Sibling rivalries, old patterns don't just stay in childhood. The sibling that always felt overlooked or the one that always took charge, it can replay in the boardroom debates decades later. So the fix isn't pretending that history didn't exist. It's really to have the clear decision-making processes such as votes or just defining those roles, just so those outcomes don't hinge on who pushes the hardest, gives everyone that equal playing field. There's parent-child authority tension. That's tough. I don't know how to really ever get over that, but the child may struggle to challenge a parent's idea the way they would just another peer, and the parent may expect submission rather than debate from their kids. They were able to tell them what to do when they were a kid, and I should still be able to tell them what to do in the boardroom. But don't ignore it. Just name it out loud, and sometimes that's where that outside facilitator might help kind of soften those dynamics. So, same thing with in-laws or, the CEO that's also the family member. That's also tricky. They have that CEO hat, and maybe the board members need permission to evaluate the performance critically without feeling like it's a personal betrayal. But it's also important to learn how to disagree constructively. So confrontation isn't necessarily a bad word. It's just being able to disagree and debate and making sure your voice is heard. And then there's also the confidentiality issue. So spouses or adult kids that aren't on the board shouldn't always get a full readout of what's discussed, and that can be also tough, not telling your spouse what's been discussed on the board. So, and if a board member has a personal or financial or relational stake in a specific decision, such as their own compensation or their child's employment, maybe they step out for those conversations. Just kind of a conflict of interest type thing.
Okay. I think we have a couple more pages from the book to finish with, Kristen? I can't remember, but
Yeah, after this one, we just have,
yeah,
well, if you wanted to talk about board job descriptions,
yep,
we've
yeah, let's
got
do
a
that.
couple pages from the book here that kind of spell that out too.
Yeah, I mean, I think hopefully one message you've heard from this morning is communicating openly and clearly is always better. As someone told me, clear is kind and unclear is unkind. And so in here on the, writing up a board member job description, we've got great formatting for that right here. I think we have an example in there as well that you can utilize, steal from, etc. Um, And then there's opportunities in here to see a little bit more about, other things that you might want to bring in as far as governance tools to the board. I think some of these things are a little bit farther down the road from where we've kind of started this conversation today, but one of those might be a conflict of interest policy that you might have your board members sign, even the family board members, knowing that what they are hearing and talking about is private, isn't to be shared, making sure that they don't have somehow other relationships outside the company that might impact their viewpoints on what they share. I think that's always important, and just having people sign something like that oftentimes is all it takes to kind of shut any of that down and those issues down. So I know that Katie's going to share that book, or maybe already has, with everybody as attendees today. Um, but I just wanted to highlight a couple more pages that Kristen put together in this, that we're trying to do most of the work for you on some of this stuff, and having some drafts, having some templates and examples for you. There's a conflict of interest policy, I think, that we have in there too, that you can use as an example that's in the workbook. So, um, Kristen, anything else that you want to add before we wrap up here?
No, I think that's good. Unless somebody has a question, you can type in the chat or unmute yourself.
Yeah. With that, thanks, Katie, for bringing this up. We just plug for our last session will be on the independent side. Um, so how do we go after folks who aren't in the business, who aren't in the family, to be on our board? What kinds of things should we be looking for? What does that process look like? And lucky for all of you, we do that work with our family. So if there's, um, a need for that in your family to go looking for someone on the independent side, we can certainly talk to you about the kind of resources we can bring to bear in that. So hopefully we'll see all of you in July. And with that, I'll, on behalf of Kristen, thank everybody for being with us this morning. And I hope you have a great rest of your day and your week. And happy 4th of July, a little bit early. Take care, everybody.
Yep. Bye.